Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing with an early season snowstorm to talk about that looks like it's going to impact portions of eastern Colorado up through eastern Wyoming. And some of the models are showing a potentially historic snowfall up there. And in fact, even if there's any measurable snowfall in Denver, it's still going to be considered historic. The average date of the first snowfall, the first measurable snowfall in Denver, is October 18. So this is way ahead of schedule by about a month. And this could be a pretty substantial snow event, especially if you believe the 0Z GFS model from last night. And here you can see the 500 millibar forecast for Tuesday evening from that model. And this model so far has been the big winner in terms of the snowfall pumped out across the Front Range. And many of these amounts that is forecast by last night's GFS are pretty hard to believe. Because of how warm the temperatures are going to be in the 90s. And in fact, this entire summer has been incredibly hot across the Front Range, including Denver, many days even approaching the triple digit mark. But I think the moisture is going to be there. That amount of snow is definitely going to fall. How much of it sticks on the road, the road surfaces, of course, is always a question. But I do think there's going to be some prolific snowfall rates, including the likelihood of thunder snow, and most of this is going to happen during the day on Tuesday, and it could be a longer duration event depending on which model you believe. But this is a forecast from the 0Z GFS last night, and it shows more of a closed off system over Colorado. There you can see the closed off nature of this system in the upper level flow, and this is the 500 millibar map. Some of the models, though, don't really close off a more potent system like this. They just have a general trough, and then it closes off just a little bit off to the east, and that later evolution would mean a less significant snowstorm in Denver. Let me switch over to the full screen, and there's that 500 millibar map that I just showed you, and this is from the last night's model run, and you can see how this is definitely closed off and more intense. This is the Tuesday evening forecast, 500 millibar flow. And looking at the NAM model too, it looks like it's trending toward this solution. And the European, when it was first forecasting a snow event across Colorado and Wyoming, it was showing this more potent vortmax closing off over the Great Basin of the Four Corners region, and that would lead to more prolonged upslope flow. It would the earlier intensification of this vortmax would also lead to more substantial Lee cyclogenesis. You'll have more upslope component, basically east to west component up the terrain, and upslope is definitely going to be a big part of this system. Also vorticity advection, because this wave is initially open and then closes off, but there is plenty of vorticity advection here across the Front Range. There's also a big cold pocket of air aloft at 500 millibars, which is going to help support those snowfall rates. There's a lot of lift at the mid-levels of the atmosphere. There are 500 millibars here across the Front Range of Wyoming and Colorado, and that lift is focused at 500 millibars, which is where those big snowflakes or the dendrites grow. So you really need it to be moist with a lot of lift at 500 millibars to get those prolific snowfall rates. And then you add the upslope component that happens so often here against the Front Range for severe weather and for big time snow with this Colorado low developing. But the low is actually going to be down into New Mexico, and then that post-frontal environment, those northerly winds are going to bend back to an easterly direction, and that's going to create a major upslope flow. But I wanted to show you the difference in the model runs between the 0Z GFS last night, the 6Z GFS, the European, and the NAM, just to show you what the different snow maps mean in terms of the upper level evolution. This one is from 0Z last night, the GFS, and see how that's a closed vortmax or vorticity maximum at 500 millibars. Still quite a bit of flow here on the back side, which shows you that it's intensifying and closing off pretty far west out here near the Great Basin. This is the last night's GFS that painted 20 inches of snow in Denver all the way up to Cheyenne, including the I-25 corridor, and even over a foot across northwestern Kansas. But what it doesn't factor in is just how warm it's been leading up to this event. So a lot of that snow is going to be caked on the trees and the elevated surfaces. The foothills are likely going to get a foot or two from this snow event, which I'm leaning toward it being more of a significant historic snow event based on latest model trends. But the 6Z GFS, while it still showed a major snow event from Denver to Cheyenne, it did back off a little bit from those totals from the 0Z model. And here's the forecast from the 6Z run at the same time as the one that you're looking at right now. So see how it's just a slightly weaker wave. It's closing off just a little bit later than the 0Z run did last night. So this one, while it isn't quite closed off at the same time, it's still more of an open wave, but still has quite a bit of flow here on the backside. So it does close off eventually just a little bit further east. But if the last night's GFS is correct, and this vortex is able to close off around the Four Corners region, that's going to focus maximum lee cyclogenesis to the east of the Rockies there near Raton Pass and a little bit further south across eastern New Mexico, and that's going to lead to a more substantial upslope flow in that post-frontal environment, which is really going to cause Denver and the adjacent foothills to get hammered. But even if this solution verifies, it's still going to be a historic snowfall with likely several inches of snow in Denver, a foot or two in the Colorado foothills. But the trend from 0Z to the 6Z GFS model was just for a slightly weaker system, but I suspect that at 12Z it's going to come back to that closed off run, and that's what the 12Z NAM is also suggesting. Even though it only goes out 84 hours, you can still get a rough idea of exactly what it's going to do. But this is more of an open wave here. It has a strong positive tilt, but it's going to transition from that strong positive tilt quickly to neutral and then to a closed off system. And if that happens just a little bit further west out here near the Four Corners, as depicted by the 0Z GFS solution last night, then that's going to bring big time snowfall across the I-25 corridor. But you can see how complicated the upper level evolution is here at 500 millibars, and any difference in the timing of the of when that vortex closes off is going to lead to major differences in the snowfall across the Front Range and the I-25. If it closes off a little bit further east, then that's going to reduce the upslope component. It's also going to reduce the vorticity advection that will be focused and focusing that lift at 500 millibars and the moisture. And then you get the maximum of both worlds. You get the max vorticity advection from the 500 millibar pattern with that closing off to the west of the Colorado Front Range. And then you get the maximum upslope as well with more substantial lee cyclogenesis. And here's the European solution, which is even weaker than that 6Z GFS. This is last night's European model. This is the 0Z. We're going to be anxiously awaiting the 12Z runs for the GFS and for the European. But this one shows the least amount of snow so far in Denver, and still at least be 3 to 5 inch type of a snowfall with over a foot in the foothills to the west of Denver in Colorado and in Wyoming. But that's because it has a later, further east closing off of this system. You can see not as much flow there loaded on the backside, and that's going to cause this positive tilt to persist a little bit longer, and then it's going to cause the system to become vertically stacked and close off just to the east of Colorado. And this would lead to a little bit less snowfall, less duration of the upslope flow across the Front Range, less of that upslope component as well over the adjacent high plains, and a shorter period of positive vorticity advection at 500 millibars with this later evolution. But you definitely had a battle between the European and the GFS. The European model was the first model to suggest this snowstorm. Then the GFS trended over to the European. Yesterday, both of them were showing a big snow event. Both of them are still showing a big snow event, but there are some discrepancies with the evolution of this system. I think that the GFS is onto something with this stronger flow on the backside. And really, this upper level system is going to have no choice but to cut off, and for this the zonal flow to resume to its north, and for this to lead to a potentially historic snowfall event for Denver to Cheyenne. And here is the NAM, and this is the 12Z run. So this is the most recent run of the NAM, and this is looking out 84 hours to about Tuesday afternoon when the snow is going to be starting. And this is the reason why I believe last night's GFS, the NAM is coming on board with it. It's got this big flow here on the back side of the trough. That's going to cause it to cut off closer to the Four Corners region. That's going to prolong the period of upslope and positive vorticity advection over Colorado. So with this open wave being to the west of the Front Range here, there's still positive vorticity advection at 500 millibars, which creates lift at that prime snow growth region. And then the system will close off. You'll have major lee cyclogenesis over southeastern Colorado or northeastern New Mexico. And then you're going to begin that long duration of upslope flow into the Colorado Front Range. So look at this flow, even becoming north-northeast at 500 millibars on the backside, which is consistent with that system closing off a little bit closer to the Four Corners region. So I might be wish casting a little bit, siding with the 0Z GFS last night and the 12Z NAM this morning, but this just seems like a very believable solution, believable scenario with this system cutting off over the Four Corners, resulting in a historic early season snowfall across Denver. Last year, the first measurable snowfall was on October 10 across Denver, and that brought about 14 inches to my apartment up in the Colorado foothills. I think this is going to be a much bigger event than last year, and it's a month earlier. And because this snow is happening across Colorado, I believe that it's going to allow for a further west extension of this Bermuda High, and that could open the door for more U.S. Threat for a hurricane landfall toward the middle of the month, like September 17, 18, 19 time frame. This westward extension of the Bermuda High is going to prevent those hurricanes from recurving and becoming fish storms, and instead they'll deflect back to the west and potentially impact portions of the southeastern U.S. or the Gulf Coast. So this is one of those teleconnections that you may see, and just because there's correlation, it does not infer causation at all, but because of this less progressive pattern with this upper level system closing off to the west of Colorado, that's going to bring more snow to the Colorado Front Range, including Denver, and it's going to allow for a westward extension of that Bermuda High, which will block those recurving fish storms and potentially lead to another hurricane impact, or at least one that will threaten the southeastern U.S. and potentially the Gulf Coast toward closer to the middle of September. So my plan is to head west and cover this snowstorm, and then possibly I'll turn right back around and head back out here to intercept a potential hurricane. Right now I'm visiting my sister in northern Georgia, but I'm probably going to make a beeline for Colorado to intercept this snowstorm, and then turn it right around and potentially intercept the hurricane, if there is one. So here is the surface features and how they differ between the different model runs. This is the special model run from last night, the 0Z model from the GFS. And look at that lee cyclogenesis that is dominating across New Mexico. It's further west, which brings the post-frontal flow to be even more easterly, more of an upslope component. You also have a major vorticity advection, which helps to contribute to these pressure falls downstream of the mountains. And you've got a monster high off to the north, up in Wyoming, 1036 high. And that could lead to a very sharp cutoff of the snowfall up there. So even though the models are showing Wyoming and Cheyenne also getting hammered, I think this is going to be primarily a Colorado event, and maybe even a northeastern New Mexico event, with this low being pretty far south and the upslope really being focused to the south of Cheyenne, down to the Denver area. But this is last night's surface or forecast for Tuesday evening from the 0Z GFS. Notice it's not letting me draw on this, but there you could see also that 993 low, pretty far west in New Mexico. I should be drawing on that right now, but it's not showing up. But that shows the a pretty intense surface low down in northeastern New Mexico, a very broad area of upslope. Differently, the European solution, this is the European solution, shows a weaker surface low that's further east, more northerly component in the post-frontal environment, and that's why the European has the least amount of snowfall across the Denver Front Range. It only has a 998 millibar low down there, more northerly winds in the post-frontal environment, and even stronger high up here across Wyoming, and a little bit less of an upslope flow, whereas the 0Z GFS last night and the 6Z GFS for that matter, and the 12Z NAM all show a stronger northeasterly component there in the and that stronger upslope flow up the terrain in the post-frontal environment. But with the European solution showing a more open wave and a further east, later delayed closing off of that 500 millibar vort, it seems to be now the outlier, especially as the 12Z NAM and some of those other models, and the consistency of the GFS now with closing off that upper level system closer to the Four Corners region. That's why I think there's going to be a stronger, further west surface low, greater upslope component across Colorado, and I think there's going to be several inches in Denver just because of the road surfaces and everything being warm But I think that a lot more is going to fall, probably over a foot of snowfall is going to happen. It's just going to be difficult to measure that. Looking at some of these other stats, the earliest date of the first snow in Denver was back in 1961 on September 3rd. So these fall season snow events are definitely not out of the question across Denver. You get them in the spring, often in April and May. You get them as well during the fall, and the reason is because it's just on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and you can really get these surging cold fronts this time of year with the terrain acting as a barrier to the west. You get a big time surge of the cold front, and then you get lee cyclogenesis, especially if you get a system that closes off further west like this. Then you get lee cyclogenesis. It bends those northerlies back to a northeasterly direction, and that's when you activate the upslope machine. Reminds me almost of lake effect, where you get those upslope convective bands that just set up over the foothills and can dump just prolific amounts of snowfall. That's what I think is likely going to happen with this setup, unless we get a major surprise by the models, the new models this morning. Now we're going to look at snow maps. So I want to look for the reasons why certain things are going to happen, and then we can pop up the fun part. And that's what these are here, these snow maps that you often see. And this is last night's GFS. This is the 0Z solution from last night, and it is showing Denver up to Cheyenne, everybody getting hammered, including the foothills with well over a foot. And it all depends on if that system is more intense and closes off further west. If you get the northeasterly strong flow on the backside of that trough as depicted by the 12Z NAM, I think that that's likely going to happen. But for snow lovers, Denver up to Cheyenne, this is the model solution that you want to see. But this snow event's going to be very impactful. It's so heavy, it's so early season that it's likely going to lead to major power outages, down trees. It's going to destroy largely the fall color season out here too, as those leaves are going to come down. But last year was quite a amazing fall color season. But this year, you always pay a price when you get these early season snowfalls. But this is the GFS, and if this happens, this is going to be a record breaker. And I know a lot of meteorologists are afraid to say that it's going to be a record breaker because climatologically it's less likely for these to happen. And there's a lot of warm temperatures leading to warm ground temperatures as well. So maybe these snowfall totals aren't going to realize, or they're going to be difficult to be measured. But this is likely going to fall. And again, the last night's GFS is a bit of an outlier. But here is the 6Z GFS, still hanging on to a substantial snow event across Denver, several inches, like a 6 to 10 inch type of a snowfall event. But the GFS is showing just a little bit later of a closing off of that vortmax a little bit further east, and for the reasons that we just discussed, that's not as ideal for a major snow event. But the European is a bit more of the outlier too, with the more progressive upper system maintaining that positive tilt longer, weaker lee cyclogenesis to the east of New Mexico and Colorado, but still the foothills getting hammered with double-digit snowfall totals there. Cheyenne getting a big snowfall as well. And Denver down Castle Rock, the Palmer Divide, getting some enhancement too from those northerlies. So even the Palmer Divide, with that west to east orientation of the terrain, even a more northerly post-frontal environment, will still get some big snowfall totals somewhere down there to the south of Denver. But I suspect that this is going to end up being a pretty substantial snowfall event. We'll start to see those alerts come out as well as confidence increases in the scenario with the upper level system closing off further west. But we got another hot day to get through, a couple of hot days ahead of that big cold frontal passage in Denver. But I think that this is going to be a historic snow event, and I'm going to definitely head west to intercept these. So now I'm going to take a look at some of the comments on here and see if there are any questions. Thanks, guys. Glad you enjoy my weather reports on here. I really appreciate your support of live storm chasing, these briefings, and our Team Dominator science. I'm going to bring the infrasound sensor out there, the subsonic probe, and I'm going to try to measure some data, maybe even record some thunder snow, something happening out there. Maybe I'll even be able to record the presence of avalanches. Don't expect that to happen since there's no snowpack in the higher terrain just yet. But if you get a bunch of wet snow out there over steep terrain, there still could be some of those. Yeah, this is definitely a smaller crowd, and I like to do the daily weather briefings to the supporter groups. And then when there's those big impactful events like a hurricane coming in, then I'll do the briefings for everybody just to get the word out on those things. Also, be sure to check out the new t-shirt designs that Mandy has pumped out. Incredible t-shirt designs in support of Hurricane Laura recovery. We've got the We Are the Storm shirts. We've got Louisiana Strong shirts as well. Just some generic Hurricane Laura 2020 shirts, the proceeds of which will go toward organizations already on the ground in Lake Charles helping out. Also some national charities. Really anybody that's down there helping out and we believe is reputable, we're going to help support with that. And we'd also like to bring our own truck of supplies into these storms eventually after the fact, and we're kind of growing to that, but just trying to find a way to raise resources, manpower, and then head out and help out after the storm, not just during, before and during. I do think that there is some severe weather possible. We've got a couple of slight risks as well. Even today, up across the Corn Belt, looks like some ridge runners. We'll definitely break down that severe weather threat. Additionally, I was making this really focused on the snow. The tornado threat, though, is quite minimal, so it looks like it's going to be more of a wind event, probably a quick evolution of an MCS up there. But today and tomorrow could see some severe weather, and now we've got the new NAM out here, so let's break down the severe weather as well. But I'm not seeing any robust, substantial tornado threat, at least in the near term. But I still think that this fall season is going to be quite active, probably during October, one of those periods. So let's break down today's setup. And here you can see the anticyclone that is dominating over the west. Eventually, a major pattern shift is imminent that's going to lead to this snow event across Colorado. But these are some ridge runner type setups here. On the northeastern side of the ridge, you'll get these disturbances that come across the ridge. This is the forecast for this evening. Just looking at some of the generic indices. 0 to 3 kilometer EHI is always a good indicator of MCS location. And it looks like the storms will probably develop somewhere across South Dakota and then turn right into this deeper moisture right along this gradient between the instability to the southeast and also the more stable air under the core of the jet. Looking at tomorrow's forecast, this is a pretty substantial event here across southern Wisconsin and Illinois. Quite a bit of instability out there, so I could see a greater tornado threat tomorrow across portions of Wisconsin banked up. And there'll probably be a complex of storms that forms this evening and rips through, which will leave behind an outflow boundary to focus more convection for tomorrow. Looking at some of these soundings across southern Wisconsin, these are big photographs here. It looks like there's going to be quite a bit of capping, a stout elevated mix layer, as often happens here with these ridge runners. But I wouldn't even be surprised if there's another derecho type of an event happening up there. The models show a minimum of convection, and that's just because it's a ridge runner. And look at that. The models are showing not a lot of storms developing at all, even overnight tonight. Oh, there it is. Finally, late night tonight, it shows that MCS starting to develop across southwestern Minnesota, closer to midnight. There you can see it getting going. So that's what the slight risk is in place today. So southern Minnesota, ripping into northeastern Iowa. Probably will wake up tomorrow morning, and there'll be a pretty substantial complex of storms ongoing that could act to clear out this warm sector. So in terms of severe weather tomorrow in Wisconsin, I could see this complex of storms sliding into northern Illinois and completely wiping out the warm sector out there. And that's exactly what the HRRR is showing. So even though the best setup and best ingredients and best parameters are on Sunday afternoon across central and southern Wisconsin, the complex of storms is going to develop late tonight, move across southern Minnesota, and then likely prevent storms from taking advantage of that prime environment for But sometimes these derechos will develop. So if tonight the complex of storms is not as substantial, that'll allow for rapid destabilization across Wisconsin. And we could get the development of a stronger MCS type of a system here across northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and even southwestern Michigan. So even though I'm focused on this early season snow event, oh, there it goes. So even though I'm focused on this early season snow event, I do think that there's going to be the potential for some ridge runners and complexes of storms across the Corn Belt. But definitely the focus is on the focus is definitely on the snowstorm and the potential for intercepting another hurricane toward the middle of September, and the snow actually happening, the snow event evolving, leading to more of a less progressive upper level pattern and a westward extension of that Bermuda high out there. So thank you, everybody. I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. And let's keep an eye on these 12Z models, the GFS and the European, and then we'll get an idea of the timing and the evolution and intensity of this upper level vort and the cold front that's going to blast through the front range and lead to a potentially historic snowfall coming up on Tuesday. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your Saturday. Should be enjoying an Oklahoma Sooner football game today, but just a couple of good football games on today. I guess UTEP is playing, so definitely got that to look forward to. So have a good rest of your Saturday, everybody. Stay well, and I hope you enjoy my weather reports.